Good Yontif, everyone. We're so grateful for you joining us for Beth El Talks 5782. We're taught on this day that God opens up the Sefer Chaim, the book of life, and that book is the Torah of our lives. As Rabbi Mates shared with us this morning, we all need to make sure that we pay attention and know the guidebook. And the guidebook in our tradition is that gift of Torah. But Torah is not limited just to the black letters written on the white parchment, the stories of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Torah is also the story of our lives. And over the many years, we have been blessed to realize that we can learn Torah from so many members of our congregation and community who have important stories to tell and wisdom to share from the Torah that is the parchment of their lives and their page in Sefer Chaim, their page in the book of life. And this year we are blessed as we focus on the themes of resilience to have three extraordinary individuals who will be sharing their stories and their wisdom with us. The first is Harold Jonas. Dr. Harold Jonas, as we'll learn about in a moment, is an expert in behavioral health industry and addictions. We also hear from Kira Melamed-Vainberg, who works as part of our Temple team, and will share with you her journey from the Ukraine to Israel, here to America, and through her own resilient story of recovery from illness. And Captain Jeff Schneider, who served for 10 years in the U.S. Army in deployments to Kuwait and Bosnia, and then recalled through the reserves to service in Iraq, and he will tell us a bit about his story of resilience from his service to our country. Harold Jonas will be our first speaker. Dr. Harold Jonas is a recognized expert in the behavioral health industry and specializing in addictions. He creates innovative solutions for individuals and providers and in healthcare systems overall. Over the past 30 years, his desire to be of service has led him toward developing healthcare business models aimed at successfully merging the helping professions with capital enterprises. Harold built a network of sober houses to help those in the first stages of recovery find a safe and secure place for them to live. And he eventually developed Sober.com, which was the first online comprehensive directory for the addiction community and profession. The success of that enterprise led to many others in the healthcare industry. And Harold has been a member of Temple Beth for more years than me, has raised his children in our congregation's embrace, and has always been a resource for me and for our clergy when we've had members of the congregation beginning their road to recovery from addiction. And we are blessed that we had a chance to celebrate the birth of his first grandson just a few weeks ago. Harold Jonas.
The call came from Rabbi Levin on a Saturday afternoon. Without hesitation, I agreed to share my understanding, experience, and strengths with resilience. Thank you all for being here, and thank you, Rabbi Levin, for thinking of me. That statement sounds just a bit redundant, since we've been linked together since you arrived at Temple. We met during Shiva from my father, Max, back in 1996. We can classify our relationship as resilience bonding. Maybe we're onto something. My name is Dr. Harold Jonas. I am a licensed mental health counselor. I practice locally and think globally. I've been a Temple member since 1989. Temple Beth El has served our family well. It has been a part of our way forward. I am honored to be included in this year's Temple Talks. Slide, please. When I counsel people who have experienced a traumatic event, one of the questions I might ask, tell me where you were when you first saw or heard what happened. Of course, this applies if the person is not the victim of the trauma. Like all of us, I had last seen New York City like this. Why would I ever think it would be different the next time I visited? Except, of course, for more and taller buildings. I often take for granted much of what is and assumed it will always be. 4 years ago, on another Saturday afternoon, I got a call. Someone had seen on social media a friend's son had overdosed and was in critical care. Her son and mine grew up together and used drugs together. I immediately called my wife, Dawn, and asked if she wanted to meet there. We decided to go together. Despite the hospital being local, it was a very, very long ride for me. We went to be support for our mutual friend and her unresponsive son. I parked with trepidation. Fentanyl had already infiltrated Palm Beach County. I had already bounced back from doing CPR on my son Jay during one of his overdose experiences. Was I ready for this? And did I need to do this? That is what I asked myself. The last time we were in this same hospital was after that overdose. And did we want to be here again? We pushed on and started to walk down the long hospital corridor to the double doors marked critical care. And suddenly, we stopped in our tracks. Dawn and I turned and looked at each other and froze. We knew this could be us at the other end of the corridor one day. Slide, please. For me, I remember exactly where I was when I heard the news. I saw it. I felt like I was there living it. The first plane had just hit Tower 1, and the news was reporting an accident. I was passing through the manager's office of a property I was operating, and then suddenly I was transfixed to a screen displaying stunning horror. It was not if I was going, but when. And then the thoughts came. What about the family? What if this was the beginning of more? What do I do? The call did come, and we discussed the options, and off I went. Slide, please. While I waited for my travel arrangements and a launch date, I remembered 1991, feeling the same call to service. Then it was in response to Hurricane Andrew and the chaos and devastation wreaked upon Homestead. I could not go then, but felt present in spirit and intense empathy for all that were there. I remember feeling powerless back then, watching and hearing the stories of need. And sure enough, by September 15th, I was looking out a plane window preparing to land at LaGuardia. It seemed like I could feel what had happened through the smoke and the haze below. Upon landing, one can smell the emotion of the devastation. It was visible and permeated everything. My internal calling to be of service and a contributor was being answered. Slide. We were embedded at a hotel in Midtown. We were 40 contractors from all over the country working for one of the only crisis response companies around. The hotel was still being remodeled and was not open to the public. This afforded us, the new army of caregivers, an environment of needed camaraderie after navigating through our daily absorption of horrors. This was our view as we looked downtown. This was our view as we traversed the tri-state geography of shocked faces and shattered spirits. We were providing trauma counseling to the many displaced employees and their families. Disbelief and shock continued to propel me as I listened to the answers to the question, where were you when? Slide. Within walking distance from our hotel was this park. It served as a live bulletin board for one too many looking for their loved ones. Imagine wandering around New York City for a loved one. I did. Signs and pictures were posted by family seeking hope of news. For me, it was a daily reminder of gratitude. It was also a reminder of values and ideals that were forced to be examined and challenged. How was I to be of service? You know the visual. If I throw a stone in a pond, there is a point of impact and ripples form as the water is displaced. It then rushes back to fill the space it left behind. I was one of the concentric rings of victim impact in the pond. Although in Florida, impacted, I was one of the concentric outlying rings. And now, in New York City, I was an inside ring of impact, one that was up close with survivors. What was revealed to me was resilience in real time. Slide. This is what I had to do to become and stay healthy. I had to do it then, and I still have to do it today. I have to make a conscious effort to strive to be my best me every day. Because of me, and ever since that day, each one since could be the last one. I embrace each day since with a different perspective and do not take it for granted. I use it to keep from becoming unhealthy. You see, there had been many prior calls, but this was that one. It was from the emergency room at a local hospital. There had been a wreck. Jay had just bought a new scooter less than a week prior. Was it Groundhog's Day? We had gotten this call. We had lived this nightmare. My brother-in-law had been in a fatal bike wreck on the same day 17 years prior. The same car turning into his path, the same impact, the same outcome. We were suddenly reliving that in real time. Jay was 27. We went and we walked through the double doors of the ER. We stopped and looked at each other, and my heart skipped beat after beat. My stomach started turning, and every fiber of my being was on high alert. My sense of control was being tested. From the ER, Jay was transferred to critical care on life support. We looked at each other. The minutes turned to hours, and it was during this time one gets a chance to reflect on what seems each and every choice ever made. The chance to second guess, the chance to bargain with God, and the chance to say, if only. The seizures began to happen more frequently. I remember the intense feelings of helplessness and powerlessness I felt as I watched them come one after another. They overtook his essence, and hope for recovery faded. Quality of life going forward was being questioned. We looked at each other over and over, again and again, and we knew. Being a parent was challenged on every level. I was supposed to love and protect, teach and guide. I was supposed to be there. How can I consider the decision to pull the plug on my own child? The decision was made, and we let him go to be at eternal peace. Jay had joined the infamous 27 Club. His impact, like the stone hitting the water in the pond, would be revealed to us. In this moment of vulnerability with you, I feel empowered to stay resilient, because the pain of losing a child is like that other. If not, I feel trapped in Groundhog's Day, like the character in the movie that knows the outcome of the day before it happens. We all experience opportunity to practice our resiliency as life serves us our own menu of experiences. This is the journey I've traveled, learning and becoming resilient. It has proven to be life-saving. I can be of service, honoring the journey of others and transcending their pain, so when mine becomes paralyzing, I can trust it will peak and subside like the waves in an ocean called life. This is the new view where those towers once stood. Slides, all the way to the end, Danny. Thank you. It is adopted as our symbol of everlasting peace, love, and resiliency. Happy New Year.
Thank you, Harold, for that extraordinary journey through how service and resilience and life and choosing life can lead us forward from the darkest of darknesses. We are blessed now to hear from Kira Melamed-Vainberg. Kira grew up in Zhytomyr in the Ukraine, and following high school, she chose to make Aliyah and work to integrate into the modern state of Israel. Following her marriage and the birth of her son, Kira and her husband, Michael, decided that they wanted to move to the United States. And just prior to departing, she received news that she had breast cancer. And Kira will share with us how she faced the struggles of immigration to a new country and how resilience helped her to fight the scourge of cancer.
Being an anxious person can be both a curse and a blessing. Anxiety pushes you to action when your mind races with various what-if questions, but it can do the same when it asks, what if not? I grew up in Zhytomyr, Ukraine, a city with a significant Jewish population back then, in a family of a teacher and a scholar, from whom I absorbed love for languages and books. We weren't religious, but certain traditions seeped through at family gatherings with my grandma's delicious cooking. And one of my fondest memories is my grandparents speaking Yiddish. I didn't understand much then, but later when I learned Hebrew, some of the words I often heard finally made sense. As a teen, I got engaged in Hebrew classes and other activities at the local Jewish agency, and then was offered their position of a youth counselor, madricha, to teach younger kids about Israel, Zionism, and Jewish traditions. I finished high school and began studying English major at the local university, while the Jewish agency continuously offered immigration programs to young adults. I'm not sure what pushed me to leave everyone and everything behind and make Aliyah alone. Maybe it was the anxiety of the thought, what happens if I don't give this a chance? My first years in Israel were mostly in survival mode. Only after 1 year in the country, with very little Hebrew and even less money, I studied my degree in communications and English literature at the Hebrew University. Having to fully immerse in Hebrew pushed my English aside, and at times I had to make a mental effort to remember even simple words. It's hard enough studying in a new language and having to work to support yourself, but in addition, I was trying to obtain the sense of belonging, to be an integral part of the Israeli society, and that required a significant adjustment in mentality and culture. Shortly after I graduated, got a job in the Ministry of Absorption and met my husband-to-be, when things finally seemed to settle down, I started having the most dreadful panic attacks. It didn't make any sense on the surface, but my body needed to release all the anxiety and stress of the first years of my Aliyah, and it caught up with me when I thought I could finally let my guard down. I still remember this as the worst thing that has ever happened to me, but with some cognitive behavioral therapy and time, I learned to manage it. Fast forward to 8 years later, I was married, my son was 4, and we made the decision to move to the United States. We were pretty happy in Israel, but something was missing, and we wanted to explore what else life had to offer. In May 2015, we sold our apartment. My husband already resigned from his job, and I was about to as well. We had tickets to Miami for July, for our second immigration. Then one night, I accidentally left a hard nodule in my right breast. My anxiety kicked in again. I wasn't too scared yet, but the next day, I scheduled an appointment with a breast surgeon. He examined me, asked some questions, and said, "It's nothing. You don't have any family history. You're so young. I was 33 then. I'm telling you, it's nothing." I was somewhat relieved, but he gave me a referral for an ultrasound to be sure. The technician did find the nodule suspicious, so I had to do a biopsy. About 10 days later, I was on the train from Tel Aviv, where I worked, to Modi'in, where we lived, when I got a call from the primary doctor who said, "Please come as soon as you can." I guess I knew then and there, but I still wanted a straw of hope. I called my husband and we came to the clinic. There was a man in front of me in the line, but the doctor told me to come in first, and I remember how upset he was that I cut ahead of him, while I thought, you probably don't want to be in my spot. There are no accurate words to describe the feeling when they tell you you have cancer. Your brain just gets wrapped in a fog of shock and utter disbelief. We hear that cancer happens to 1 in 8 women, but do we really think it can happen to me? I remember thinking if this was maybe a bad dream. But add to that our upcoming immigration, I didn't even have time for self-pity or second opinions. We literally wouldn't have a place to live in a month later. There's a Russian expression, «Не имей 100 рублей, а имей 100 друзей». It's better to have 100 friends instead of 100 rubles. And that was definitely the time when people's help was invaluable. A friend who worked in a private hospital arranged multiple tests and appointments. A couple who was going away for a month offered their house. Other friends helped watch our son. Naturally, we had to postpone our leave. I had a surgery, then I started a daily irradiation and medication. I also tested for BRCA genes, which came back negative. We found another temporary rental, and a few months later, we finally landed in Florida. We had to move 4 times within 9 months. If anything, it was a great opportunity, or rather necessity, to declutter. I found a great new doctor and continued with my follow-ups. The best thing that came out of this initial diagnosis was my interest in healthy lifestyle and nutrition. This led me to study and get certified as an integrative nutrition health coach and gave me instrumental knowledge. 2 years later, after the first diagnosis, during routine imaging tests, the technician frowned at the screen. They referred me for an MRI, but I was in such a denial. This could not be happening again. Reluctantly, I finally did MRI and a biopsy only 2 months later. While I was awaiting the biopsy for the second time, my father tried to reassure me by saying the lightning doesn't strike twice at the same spot, to which apparently my cancer responded, hold my beer. My oncologist called me and said in an apologetic voice that my biopsy was positive. I had decided to have bilateral mastectomy with a reconstruction. It was a 10.5-hour surgery that required over a month-long recovery. I was blessed with the support of my friends who helped with meals and my son, and of course my husband who took care of me while I was in so much pain. Shortly after this round, the Memorial Hospital tested me for 36 different gene mutations and found that I have a rare one called CHEK2. It causes an early onset of breast cancer that repeats itself within a short time span and can also cause colon cancer. Few people actually know about this gene, including doctors. Another 2 years passed. I just started working at the temple when I felt a little bump on my breast scar. At that time, my oncologist switched to another hospital and was not allowed to treat his old patients, so I had to see the head of oncology. And he said, don't worry, it's just a scar tissue. I really wanted this to be just a scar tissue. It made all the sense. But somehow I knew I can't just rely on his opinion. I had to listen to my body and advocate for myself. I've already experienced firsthand that doctors make mistakes. So I insisted and said, let's do an ultrasound anyway, just to make sure. In January 2020, just before the pandemic hit the United States, I got my 3rd cancer diagnosis. I shouldn't say I was surprised by that point, but it was still pretty surreal. First thing on my mind was to look for my old oncologist, whom I trusted, and luckily I found him and was able to switch to his hospital. I had my next surgery in February 2020 and another one later in August. It was definitely a challenging year on so many levels, and I am deeply grateful for all the help, support, and love from my temple that kept me afloat. One of the good things that made my 2020 memorable was my getting American citizenship. How fortunate am I to be able to call 3 countries home, to have a multicultural identity and friends from various corners of the world. As everyone else, I hoped that 2021 would bring us all some respite. But this year I lost my father and my grandma, both to COVID, both across the ocean. I often hear you're so strong or keep a positive attitude, because often how you really feel makes people uncomfortable. And no matter how you try to stay positive, which I do, cancer sucks. And the fear of getting it yet again is always there. And realizing over and over that your loved ones are gone is heartbreaking. So I learned that when I find myself in a dark place, it's important to acknowledge that, not to try to dismiss these emotions. And it's okay to cry. It's okay to feel frustrated, angry, or sad. My journey is far from being over. I am currently on a long-term preventative treatment that takes quite a toll on my body. But I try to accept that this is all part of me, and I can still continue to find joy every day. Joyce Meyer said, being negative only makes a difficult journey more difficult. You may have been given a cactus, but you don't have to sit on it. So while I validate my hardships, I'm also more mindful and appreciative of all the little pleasures that life offers. Watching a beautiful sunset, having some good laughs with friends, traveling, and so many more. And when things get tough, I try to remember, Gam ze yavor, this too shall pass, and there is always a hope that tomorrow will be better. Thank you, and Shana Tova.
Thank you, Kira. We continue to pray for good health and continued refuah shlema, healing of every measure of your body, mind, and spirit. We're blessed to have with us now Captain Jeff Schneider. Jeff served in the U.S. Army for 10 years, deploying to Kuwait and Bosnia. Finding his discharge in 2000, Captain Schneider was recalled to active duty in 2004 and was given command of the 227th Transportation Company with the 101st Airborne Division. The road dogs of the 227th completed more convoy miles and missions than any other unit in Iraq during their time there, despite averaging contact with enemy forces every third day. All 154 soldiers in the company returned home to their families. Captain Schneider was awarded the Bronze Star. He's been married to Meredith since 2000, and they have 4 children, Ben, Rachel, Gabrielle, and Milena. And we are blessed to have him to share his experience of resilience and renewal from his service in combat and in war.
Thank you, Rabbi Dan and Temple Beth El, for the honor of asking me to speak today. We who have seen war will never stop seeing it. In the silence of the night, we will always hear the screams. That's a quote from William Galloway, who was a legendary war correspondent, the best of his generation, and Colonel Hal Moore. They co-wrote the book, We Were Soldiers Once and Young. And I can say that in the 16 years that I've been home, there's not a day that for at least a moment I don't remember having been there. And it's not always something bad. Sometimes it's something funny that happened, or I think of someone who I served with. But it's there every day. I had an ROTC scholarship. I was commissioned when I graduated college. I deployed to Kuwait, deployed to Bosnia. Spending more than half my time away from home, I decided the only way I'd ever have a family is if I left the military. I was in the individual ready reserve, which is basically just a list of names that if something happens, you can get called up. But in 2000, when I got married, what was the possibilities of a war big enough that people would get called back to active duty? About 0. Then on 9/11, while my wife and I, we worked in downtown Dallas, and like most big cities, Dallas was evacuated on 9/11. We're sitting at home watching the horrors on TV. And like an awful lot of people in my situation, she's pregnant with our son, Ben. I get up, I walk out of the living room, I walk into the kitchen, I pick up the phone, and I call the U.S. Army Reserve Personnel Command. And I said, I don't care where we're going. I want to go. I want to be there. And then I walk back in the living room, and my pregnant wife is looking at me, giving me this look like, what did you just do? And all I could say is, I should have asked you about that first, shouldn't I? So I started drilling with a unit again, and then 2 years later, I got called back to active duty, and I found out I was taking the 227th Transportation Company over to Iraq. We were attached with a battalion from the 101st Airborne, and our mission was to do convoy security. And I tell everyone, no matter what your job in the Army, it's actually pretty easy because it's written down what to do, and there's always somebody to tell you what needs to happen. Our job was pretty simple. Get stuff from point A to point B, and don't let anything on earth stop us from accomplishing our mission. Our base was on the Iraq-Kuwait border. What we would do is we would pick up convoys in Kuwait, and then we would go bring them up to wherever the end point was in Iraq. Mostly, we went to the airport in Baghdad, we went to Fallujah, we went to Ramadi, Al-Assad, and Balad. But in the course of the time that we were there, we hit just about every corner of that country. While we were there, Rabbi Dan had mentioned, We did more missions and more miles than any other unit doing convoy security in country. About a quarter of my soldiers were wounded during our time there, but all of them fortunately came home. One of the unique things about being a company commander in combat is your word is it. You are the ultimate authority. There's no HR department anybody can go complain to. Nobody can go ask someone for a second opinion. What you say goes. My senior leaders, my best friend in the world was my first sergeant, my senior non-commissioned officer, and we became as closer than any brothers could be. If he disagreed with me on something, he could try to convince me, but the minute I said, no, this is what we're doing, he had to turn around and execute on that. Same thing with me and my battalion commander. That's just the way the military works. But the magnitude of some of the power and authority that you have, over time, it just kind of builds on you and it changes you a little bit as a person. And I told Rabbi Dan this story one time. We're headed south on a convoy, somewhere south of Najaf. I think we were around Diwania. And Iraqis were allowed to keep a weapon in their home, but for obvious reasons, they couldn't have them out on the street. And I get a call from the lead vehicle in the convoy saying that there's a guy walking next to the convoy with an AK-47. I jump up in the turret of my Humvee to take a look. I get back on the radio. I said, what's he doing? And they said, well, he's just walking and the weapon's pointing at the ground. So I told him to keep an eye on him, and as long as he didn't raise his weapon, don't do anything. The rules of engagement at the time in 2004 were basically, if you have a weapon and we deem you to be a threat, we can do whatever we have to do to eliminate that threat. We don't have to wait for you to do anything. And it seems, common sense. Well, he's just walking, it's pointing at the ground, we're not going to do anything. But this is also a time where we were getting attacked a lot, and a lot of different things were happening. But all these years later, it strikes me, and obviously I have no way of knowing whatever happened to that man, but the only reason that he lived to see the end of that day is I decided that he could. And that's a strange thing to say, and that if I decided he shouldn't live until the end of the day, I would have got well, it's your judgment, job well done. And that type of responsibility can really build up over time, and it makes things like coming home difficult. It's an adjustment. We flew home to Fort Eustis, Virginia. We had 2 weeks to out process. We were a reserve unit. When I was on active duty and I got home from a deployment and I went back to wherever I was living, everyone around me was in the Army. Everyone had similar experiences, even if they weren't on that deployment. Coming back to a small town in Texas where I was the only one who deployed, there was nobody that could relate to me, relate to what I had gone through. People were naturally curious and they wanted to talk to me, but they didn't know how to approach me. And that made me, my reaction, which wasn't the right one, pull back. I was very detached. I felt like I had no mission and no purpose. Every day when I was overseas, I had a mission from the minute I woke up. When I was at home, what's my big decision? Do I go to Kroger and buy groceries today? Do I go to Walmart and see what new TVs look like? There's nothing life or death, nothing important. And if nothing seems that important, then there's just nothing to do. And I stepped back. I had to get to know my kids. My son, I don't have any memories of him when he was 2 years old because I never knew him when he was 2 years old. My oldest daughter, Rachel, was born while I was there. I came home, she was 7 months old. I wanted her to know who Daddy was, and I was focused on my family, but nothing else. Another strange thing coming home, though, especially from being a company commander, is you don't have authority anymore. You don't have the ability to just say, make this happen. And I was lucky my wife had read up a lot about what to expect and what to do, and she handled things well, but there's one day that stands out to me. I'd go through, walking through the motor pool of my company, and if I'd see something out of place, I'd correct it on the spot, make sure that soldier fixed it. Because if you don't fix the little things, then big things go wrong. And if big things go wrong, somebody gets killed. So you fix everything. Well, I'm home for a couple of weeks, and I'm walking through the kitchen, and out of the corner of my eye, I see the dishes are piled up. And this isn't Jeff Schneider speaking at that time. Captain Schneider's voice comes out, says to my wife, "Hey, Mare, Those dishes are piled pretty high. The sink looks like crap. How about you get that squared away and make sure everything looks the way it should? Anyone who knows my wife knows she has two gifts. One is she not only is a crier, but she can make anyone else cry. She has a gift of bringing tears, but she also has a gift of using colorful language. And the words that she used to let me know that she was not one of my soldiers and that would not be tolerated in our house was amazing, and not a single word that I would repeat on Yom Kippur. But I was lucky with her, but with other people I wasn't. Good friends that I had before I went, I just lost contact with. I drifted away. I didn't know how to react to them, and they didn't know how to react to me. And it took a while, but after a couple of years, I realized I didn't like going places. I didn't like going out. I used to play in a tennis league all the time before I went to Iraq. I quit. I stopped playing tennis. I used to play golf 3 days a week. It was 15 years after I got back until I played golf again. I stopped doing all that stuff because I didn't want to run into people. I couldn't relate to people. I had no empathy. And that was a turning point for me when I realized that I needed to work on myself, and I was becoming so isolated. All I had left was some friends I went overseas with and my wife, and if I didn't fix myself, I could lose them. So I started little things, like I didn't like being in the store because I might run into people. So I would start going to Walmart at midnight, which I will tell you is the best time to do your grocery shopping because nobody's around and you check out quick. But I'd start at midnight. The next week I'd go at 11. The next week at 10. And then I'd start showing up when more people are around just to get more comfortable. I might run into someone. My wife would laugh when I'd walk through the store. Even if I wasn't on the phone, I'd hold the phone up to my ear so that people would think I was talking to someone and they'd leave me alone. I forced myself to stop doing that. I forced myself to listen to people. And I ended up finding out that people have some great things to say. And when you listen to people, you can learn a lot about yourself and get better at the things that you do. There's one thing, though, and I'll tell you, most of the people that I know like it when people say thank you for your service. For whatever reason, I've never known how to respond to that, so I've never been comfortable with that. And some of you might remember this year on Memorial Day, I spoke here at the Temple. And I spoke about a friend of mine who I was in ROTC with in college who was killed in Iraq, same time that I was there, a couple miles from where I was. And that was easy for me to speak about because I was talking about someone else. But after services, when we left the sanctuary, a lot of people came up to me and they said, thank you for your service. My uncle served, my brother served, whatever it was. And they're telling me these stories and I'm appreciating hearing them. But I've never learned to be comfortable with that. And to anyone who saw that, if I seemed aloof, I wasn't, and I apologize for that. And that's one thing that I'm still working on, is how to accept that. I appreciate it. I just don't know how to react. And that's the one thing that I'm still working on. Just two other things, as going for, I'll say the last 5-6 years, things have gone so well for my family. It's insane. And I don't think any of that would have happened if I didn't start fixing me. I couldn't have fixed the other problems that we had and gotten us to where we are. But somebody a couple of years ago asked me what I was most proud of in life. And Meredith was there, and I can't remember who asked me, but it had to be something important because I really wanted to answer that question. And somebody, it's not a normal conversational question. So my wife's there with me, and, most guys are supposed to say, oh, the day I got married. Oh, the day my first kid was born. And I didn't even think about it. I said, I brought 154 soldiers to war. We did every mission given to us. And the moment when I brought them home into the gym at Fort Eustis, Virginia, and every single one of my soldiers was reunited with their families, is the proudest moment of my life. And I also think this is just a nice bookend today. My daughter Rachel, who was born 17 years ago, In a couple of hours, we're going to be in the sanctuary. We're going to blow the shofar, and we're going to say next year in Jerusalem. That girl who was born 17 years ago when I was in Iraq is spending Yom Kippur today, this year, in Jerusalem. Thank you.
We are so grateful to Harold and to Kira and to Jeff, members of the congregation just like you, members of our community, for sharing the intimacy of their lives and their struggles, their pain, and their resilience. And we hope that the wisdom that they shared with us today will be wisdom that we will carry forward into the new year. We thank them and we thank you for joining us. Our afternoon service with Yizkor and Ne'ilah will begin at 3:30 p.m. We wish everyone a meaningful fast and a Shana Tova.